Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. Alongside me today, I have AJ Richards. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan. I'm looking forward to it.
So I know right before we started mentioning how it's almost been a full year since our first episode. So for the listeners, if you go back down to episode 4, I had an episode with AJ where we talked about the food system. And I think that's a good segue into everything that you are currently doing now with just now launching From the Farm. And so if you would just like to talk a little bit about that and what made you want to do that.
Yeah, so we built a platform called From the Farm. Well, the website is fromthefarm.org. A lot of people think it's an app, and there's actually an app called From the Farm, but it's not functioning. It's based out of Egypt, and people are like, the app's not working. Well, it's not an app. So we built fromthefarm.org. The design and the intention is to be the Airbnb, so to say, of food sourcing. Our ultimate goal is localized food. It's going to take some time to grow enough producers on the platform that the local aspect becomes significant. But right now, we've got 52 producers that are live, 150 in some stage of sign up, and so you can source right from the farmer and rancher. So it's like a digital farmers market, is how I've heard others describe it. And the vision is to cut out as many of the middlemen as possible. We're not going to cut all of them out. We're a middleman. The processing facilities, the middleman, and UPS and FedEx, they're middlemen. But if we can start removing as many as possible, and really the idea is that we are the megaphone for our producers. That's our ultimate goal. Is just like Airbnb did such a good job with their branding and their recognition, people go there as much as they would go search for a hotel to stay in those kinds of facilities. And so that's our vision, is to be the megaphone for the producers, so they don't have to spend as much time in marketing. And frankly, when you look at the breakdown of the food dollar, specifically in meat, the majority of it goes to marketing. Whether it's big corporations marketing or whatnot, it's the marketing of food that's a big piece of that pie. So we figure if we can do this collaboratively, if all of these producers that are coming onto the platform at some point when our technology is as good as Shopify, people will promote their From the Farm store versus their Shopify store. And now you have this collective marketing with hundreds, if not thousands of producers nationwide, just sharing and driving traffic. And I believe that there's an abundance. So it won't matter if somebody comes to the platform and decides to buy from somebody else. Really, it won't matter. If we get millions of buyers on there, you won't have enough food produced direct to consumer to really even keep up. And so the goal isn't to just support and stop the loss of our existing farms and ranches. The goal is, just like Airbnb did, make that process so simple and popular that it paves the path for new producers to get on the platform, like people buying homesteads, an acre all the way up to 40 acres or whatever. But if we can simplify that process, I think we can revitalize agriculture in our country, because people will have the outlet for it and not have to worry about all of those added tasks. If an individual producer hires a marketing company, they're going to pay thousands of dollars a month, and they're not promising sales. They're just saying, we'll get your brand out there and then see where it goes. Most producers don't make enough revenue to pay a social media expert or a marketing expert to do that. So that's why we want to do it collaboratively and share that burden. And now, as that happens, just like Airbnb, it made it so simple that if I had an extra room in my house, I literally take a photo, post it, and I know it's going to rent. So if we do the same thing and build a marketplace that works the same way, somebody sitting in a cubicle banging their head against the wall, Googling and looking at homesteading in all their free time, we can build the pathway for them to get out of the city and get into their own homestead and have an operation that's waiting. Literally, I think what will happen is we will grow so well that we'll be waiting for more producers just to fill the gaps. And that's a good thing. If we can create that problem, that's a good problem to have. Customers waiting for good local sources to come online. So
I love this. I mean, especially because what I'm trying to do with my brand and educating as well is just trying to make it as frictionless as possible for the consumer, because whenever you've been so used to, say, being going to the grocery store for your whole life, and now you're kind of being asked to support locally, which farmers markets there's nearby, but say you need to go to a farm for raw milk, that's asking a lot for someone to take an hour and then pay a premium essentially for raw milk versus going to the grocery store. And what I like about this, it really adds the awareness sake too, to where, oh, there's these awesome farms, or even homestead. I like that a lot, adding the homestead piece too,
Yeah.
because then that just drives more incentives for folks to join and start their own little homestead to potentially, have a side income through that, or continue to expand to where it could be a full income. You mentioned at the beginning that there's just so many different touch points in the system that you're trying to bypass. I guess what specifically of the whole food system with the bottlenecks that you're trying to really tackle with From the Farm?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. And really that's because there's bottlenecks everywhere. Our existing food system is so complex that that's precisely why it's so fragile. There are so many different things that in different areas that feed this food system that if any of them had any significant problems, we would see another collapse, similar to what we started to see happening in COVID. We didn't get better. In fact, I think we got worse since COVID. On the surface, it looks like we're good, but actually the infrastructure underneath that people aren't super clear on is crumbling. And so, one example is processing facilities, right? One of the issues we're going to have is not just the demand for food and having more growers. We're going to have a demand for processing of that food to get it to the consumer. There's like less than 10,000 processing facilities nationwide. Um, about 30 slaughterhouses process 80% of the beef supply in the country. 30. And so when we talk about, infrastructure weaknesses and supply chain weaknesses, we can I tie that into what's happening with all of these illegal immigrants that are in our country. Many we know are here waiting to be activated by terrorist organizations or other. I was in a conference the other day, and there was an expert that works in the field of Homeland Security speaking, and he said, we know of something like 20,000 Chinese operatives that are here, actual operatives, not just Chinese people looking for a better life. They know of 20,000 that are highly trained operatives just waiting to be activated. If we tie that into 30 facilities processing 80% of the meat processing facilities are soft targets. It would not be hard to disrupt that and target just 30 facilities and literally wipe out our food security. And so this vision of decentralizing our food supply chain, if we were sourcing local across tens of thousands of producers and all of the small mom and pop processing facilities throughout the country, that's a much harder target to take out, right? Because now you've diversified. And so now you've got to take all of them out to really affect it. But right now, that's not the state we're in. And that's just one example, our power grid. I heard somewhere on a podcast recently, so don't take this for gospel, but they were talking to an expert that said that we've got something like a few dozen, let's for conversation's sake, let's just say there's 100. I know it's not that many major transformers in electrical grid transformers that if you took them out, that would wipe out our electrical infrastructure. Well, when you're processing meat specifically or especially, that has to stay frozen. If your power grid goes down, that's no longer frozen. And so now you've got significant disruptions with that as well. So there's just a lot. And that is why we're in such a fragile place, because of the complexity of our food system. So we need to simplify it.
You mentioned 10,000 processing facilities throughout America. Why is it so low?
Yeah, well, it's there's a lot of things to that. I mean, some of it is that the original processing facilities that were owned by mom and pop were run by mom and pop. Like, the slaughterhouse I used to go to, and I think it's still operating this way. When I was selling beef for my family's ranch, you'd walk in and the old man that ran it would leave the cut floor, come out front, take care of what you needed to take care of, and then he'd go back on the cut floor. Well, a lot of people don't want to do that work anymore, right? They pushed college education and college degrees for so long and so heavily, the white collar space, that it disenfranchised the blue collar space. And so we don't even have the volume of people learning how to cut meat that we used to, and or the interest in getting into that. And so that's a challenge, right? We ran a slaughterhouse in Cody, Wyoming, and one of our biggest challenges was finding meat cutters. So you have to look into automation because you just can't find the employees to do it. So that's one of the reasons. And then another challenge is the cost it takes to stay open. So if the slaughterhouse is no longer run by the guy that's also cutting, that's one more job that you have to hire for to run the facility. And that facility operator is usually going to make six figures, depending on, the where you're at and the demand or the need, but that's a six-figure income. And now you're not making enough doing that either. Part of the issue of staying open is the amount of regulations that are put on these small processors and the constant pressure for that. So a new rule comes down that says, oh, now you have to, you might be a small slaughterhouse, but now you have to, like the EPA is coming out with these new water rules for 2025, that if they go into effect, the cost to implement on all these small slaughterhouses will close them out. They don't make enough money to put into the infrastructure for the water treatment that the EPA is coming down the pipe with, that are going to force on them. And so we're going to lose more in that sense. Now, do I think that there needs to be an effective way to manage wastewater from a slaughterhouse so it doesn't affect the water tables? Certainly. But when these rules come out and they blanket everybody with the same regulations, they're not looking at individual operations and how they're already functioning, or how what they're doing actually works for what they're doing. And then there's also, they come out with the rule that now requires you to do something, but they don't come out with solutions. Like, here's what you can do to manage this without costing you $100,000, $200,000, right? I was doing research for a processing facility that I was consulting for, and came across man-made wetlands as a solution for wastewater treatment. But most people have never even heard of a man-made wetland to even implement it. But a man-made wetland is a very low cost to manage wastewater. It's very environmentally friendly, and in fact, improves the environment because there are nutrients in that water that can feed the soil, that can feed plant life and manage it in a holistic way. But that's not being taught. They're just saying, here's the rule, follow it, and figure it out on your own. And these resources aren't available to figure out how to manage it. So there's a lot of reasons we're losing our small processing facilities.
On the topic of the water wetland, because I haven't heard of that, could you just explain how that process is?
Yeah. So think of it like it's similar to a septic system, but instead of go into a settling tank, and then the water that comes out at the top that as the solids settle at the bottom, it flows into your leach field, essentially. In a septic system, they call it a leach field. But like my house is on septic. That leach field is under these dome plastic structures that then get covered with dirt underground. And so it goes in there and it just leaches into the ground. A man-made wetland doesn't have the barrier between the soil above and the leach field below. So now that nutrient dense water will actually feed planted vegetation in they kind of put like a gravel pit. So the water is under the gravel, but they plant vegetation all along the top of it. So that vegetation grows and is fed by the nutrients in that water. Well, you can plant all kinds of things. You could plant a whole field of beneficial pollinating plants for pollinators. And now you've got a honey operation that can benefit from that. So that's the concept between man-made wetlands. They have a tremendous amount of research to prove the efficacy, so that they actually can't deny it, because the water that comes out is so much cleaner because of the plant life integration, that it's cleaner than even most chemical treatment plants that you would run your water through. So that's just one example that people don't know about, right? On the solid waste process, you can use composting. I went out and toured White Oaks Pastures, and Will took us out on a tour of the fields and showed us their mounds of composting that they're doing with their waste byproduct from their slaughterhouse that then they just spread right back onto their fields. And if you go visit White Oaks, you'll see the value of that, the benefit of that. It's incredible. So there's solutions out there, but they're putting more time and money into regulation than they are education. And so that's the problem. They should spend equal the amount of time educating on what to do and then help them implement those new procedures and then work your way into, the regulations, so to say. But they're not doing that. They don't care. They just want to throw the law and the rule out there and then let you sink or swim on your own.
Dang. It always does seem like just major education and awareness with everything. And this made me remind me, I had Austin Allred from Allred Family Farm on my podcast, and he talked about, because he has a really large family operation that's, I think, their 5th or 6th generation, and they use their waste treatment water they have their own worm farm to build the soil. And that was just, so I love agriculture. There's so many creative ways that you can go about this whole ordeal. And I love that.
Yeah. And the more they do that, I think this is my conspiracy. You see my tinfoil hat on the wall behind me. The more they implement those systems, the less they are dependent on chemical agriculture. And I just read a story the other day that put out by The Guardian that the government has funded, and I don't think the government knew where the money was going to go. I think somebody just applied for a grant. I don't know the details, but my assumption is I'll give the government the benefit of the doubt. Somebody put in for an application for a grant. Well, that money was used to target people speaking out, you and I speaking out against chemical agriculture. And the way they targeted is they built a whole profile around that person, but they didn't stop there. They built an entire profile around everybody that's close to them, individual family members, partners that are close to them. And they built basically a target list to disenfranchise as they see fit the people that were spreading the good news about, hey, you don't need fertilizer. You can use these methods and get rid of fertilizer, and you don't need to poison the field to get rid of certain noxious weeds. You can actually rotate livestock in a way, and then the soil health will get rid of the weeds and bring in native plants. We did a live show last night. We do a live show on Sundays, and somebody commented on our show that they are currently dealing 8 years in with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because they worked on a ranch, and the ranch owner didn't know any better. It's just what they were taught by land-grant universities: use glyphosate to kill off these weeds or whatever, right? Roundup. And they used highly concentrated Roundup on the fields to kill these noxious weeds. And it expressed itself right away. He said that it was May to October or something like that. One season. First showed up as testicular cancer. He beat that. And then non-Hodgkin's lymphoma showed up. And now he's been fighting that. And we know for a fact that glyphosate causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we know it because Monsanto has had to pay over $10 billion in fines for causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So we know that's the fact, and yet it's still being sold on the market. And not only is it being sold on the market, those who are preaching out against it are being targeted. Like it's just messed up. So
and it's insane because it made me think of, before you even brought up Monsanto, that's what I was going to bring up too, because I think it's even up to almost 12 billion now. But the fact is that's just pennies to them because they make so much money, and so they're able to just use that for leverage to where they can do things such as what you just mentioned, and it's very disgusting.
Yeah. And the irony is Monsanto is also Bayer, and Bayer also has the medication for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So we're going to sell you the problem, and then we're going to sell you the cure. It's disgusting.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Yeah. So Bayer and Monsanto merged. So Monsanto causes the cancer and Bayer treats the cancer. Like, are we, is this a joke? Is this the Twilight Zone? Like, I mean, it is the Twilight Zone. We're living in it right now. And you're targeted for speaking out against it.
Yeah, it is insane. I would just like to talk a little bit more about currently too with our food system, because I can't remember a while ago whenever it talked about just the sheer number of cattle we have in America. It's the lowest, since the 50s or 60s?
1948 now.
Wow.
It keeps dropping.
Really?
Yep. We are losing over the last 5 years, 20,000 ranches every year, not just in the last 5 years, but every year, 20,000 ranches a year dispersed, meaning they sold off their herd and got out of the business, whether it was drought or fire or flood, or they couldn't pencil it out because they have no control and the markets swing constantly at the auction and being manipulated by the big four, the big meat processors, right? And so we're just losing our food infrastructure at a rapid pace. We're becoming more dependent on a few oligopolies to feed our nation, and they are not in it for anything other than the dollar. They have no commitment to the American people, to our health. Clearly, our health is worse than it's ever been, than any time in history, and they don't care. It's about process efficiency and maximizing revenue. Now, I'll say on some level, that's the job of the CEO. The job of the CEO for these companies is to maximize revenue. Even if they know and feel that what they're doing is morally wrong, if they say no, they're going to be replaced with somebody that will say yes. Now, does that absolve that CEO of their role? No, but that's the role they're in. Maximize profit, which comes through process efficiency, which makes our food system complicated, which makes it weak.
That, dang, that's since 1949. That's just, I'm kind of speechless with that.
Yeah, so we have the data I read recently, and it came from either the USDA or the NRCS. I don't remember which one. You can go look it up. How many cattle are in America? 87 million. And when I say cattle, I'm talking about, I'm going to use language for everybody to understand: mama cows, baby cows, and bulls, the breeders. So it's all cattle. So the reason I'm breaking that down is I want to describe to you what that looks like. If there's a major problem and we can only source beef from within our country, you have 87 million head, but those are not all ready to be processed. If we had to process all of them, you'd be eating baby calves that didn't have a chance to grow up. You'd be eating mama cows that no longer have the opportunity to produce. You'd be eating bulls that should be producing the next round of calves. Like, that's all cattle, not 87 million that's ready for harvest. That's a bad place to be. What's interesting is when I cross that data over with what the USDA claims is being imported and exported, the last thing I read, and listen, let me just say this: my job is to get people over the bullseye. I'm trying to take in so much information that exact numbers and details you should check my math, right? But I'm looking at this data and it says that we import 10% and we export 10%. So they're basically saying that they don't bring in that much outside of the country. But that doesn't make sense with the same data of 87 million head. They're not producing that many pounds of beef in this country. I don't know what's going on there. I have a guess. My guess is that they're counting calves that they're bringing in from other countries like Mexico and Canada. And because they come across the border as a calf and they get fattened and raised here, they're now claiming that to be, American. But it's not. It's their inputs coming from other countries that we're relying on. And when the current administration is putting us up against conflict with freaking every country in the nation, in the world, that's a really vulnerable place to be. It's just not, it's not good for us. And the people running the show, they don't care. They have their own agenda that they're trying to push through regardless of what it does to everybody else. The people on the left, this isn't me saying something that they haven't said themselves. They think we're overpopulated. The world is overpopulated. And so those words have come out of their own mouths. So do you think that they care if we see famine in the country and 70% of our population is wiped out? Not if they think we're overpopulated as it is. They don't. So it's a really wild time to be alive.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Going back to you mentioning the big four for the meat packing, if we can just talk a little bit about that. What is that, or who is that, I should say?
Yeah. So the four largest meat companies in the world, or in our nation specifically, is JBS. They're the largest. Cargill, Morfrig, is another one. They just bought out National Beef a few years ago, and Tyson. JBS and Morfrig are Brazilian owned. So 2 of the 4 are foreign entities. Tyson is a multinational corporation, meaning, people investing from all over the globe. And Cargill is a private family owned, but they're just as corrupt as the Rockefellers. I remember during COVID around 2020, 2021, I was reading reports that the sources they were buying from out of Brazil and other countries, they were wiping out Brazilian rainforest to increase the production ground. And in part of those reports, there was evidence to back that they were killing indigenous tribes fighting to keep the Brazilian rainforest. They were wiping them out.
Wow.
And it's dirty. When you start digging in and looking deep, it's a dirty game.
I'm trying to figure out how to best frame this. I guess currently, out just collectively too, not just the beef market. Where are we at as the food system? And because there's just obviously so much going on, especially right now, leading up to what's coming up in the coming months. And it already seems just so fragile with our food system. I know that's just a very broad question, but yeah, if there's any other things that you could add just to talk about just where we're at as a food system as a whole in America.
Yeah. I started with meat because that's what I knew, right? I come from ranching families. I'm not a rancher myself. I'm the city slicker cousin. I got to do the brandings and the cattle drives and so forth growing up, but I wasn't raised on a ranch. So that's helped me kind of navigate the conversation between consumers and producers, because I spent 12 years in Phoenix. So I lived in the city. I understand the disconnect on their side, and then I understand the disconnect on the producer's side, which is why we built the megaphone, right? Producers are so busy to try to spend the time communicating isn't feasible for many of them. And the consumers, the average consumer that lives in the city, doesn't know even how to Google to find your local farmers and ranchers. I mean, it's not hard. You can ask Google local beef and it'll pull up a list, but then you have to filter through, a bunch of marketing that's usually more accessible by big companies that can pay for that. And so people just don't know how to find it. And that's why we built From the Farm, to simplify that. So we talk to every single producer that's on the platform to confirm that they are a small family operation or a family operation. Size doesn't matter. You can be a big operation, you can be a small operation and be on there. But what we wanted to do was bridge the gap between the people who are actually responsible for growing it and simplify that so that we can help those that are growing that. I believe that one of the things that I was told constantly in the research before we built the platform, I spent 3.5 years interviewing and asking questions before we started the software, because I'm like, well, if we're going to build this, I got to make sure we build it so it actually helps. And the way to know that is to ask the people that are actually going to use it, right? And the same thing kept coming up over and over again, which was we need a competitive marketplace. So what that means is right now, most people growing cows go to an auction. The auction is then, there's people in the auction of all different walks of life. You could be a rancher buying your next round of calves for your field. Or in most cases, you're a buyer working for one of these big operations, and you're driving the prices up or down based off of the needs of your operation, and that affects everybody else in that room. So they need a competitive marketplace. So in that process of asking these questions, it became very clear that while I've been focused on beef, all of the other food sources have been disrupted and co-opted a long time ago. So produce, for example, you're not going to find very many large produce operations that aren't corporate controlled. Most of what you're going to find are market gardeners that maybe have a few acres or an acre that they're producing food. Well, that's only going to feed so many people. Usually they have a CSA where you can get a weekly box of produce that comes off of their off their fields, but they're small in comparison to what needs to be fed. So most of our produce is being imported as well. So that's on the produce side. On the dairy side, very few people have dairy cows anymore. And so when you find dairy, and the raw dairy specifically, there's just not a whole lot being done there either. And the regulations are are really hard to stay in operation as a dairy producer. That's why during COVID they were dumping millions of gallons of milk because everything was designed for just in time delivery. Well, when pieces of that supply chain break down, you're no longer getting it to the bottling facility or the pasteurization facility to process that into milk. And so that's been disrupted. Lamb, 75% of the lamb sold in America is foreign, 75%. So that's all been captured, right? So you can just go down the list. And when we talk about food, it's all corporate control. We have very few family growers left in our country. That's why we need to bring it back. So it's a really, I'll just be direct. It's a really dangerous time for us in America. I don't think that famine is an impossible scenario for us.
I'm curious with From the Farm, and since you're talking to all of them individually, do you have a set of criteria that they have to, hit, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, good question. The answer is no. We want any producer doing anything they're doing to be on there, but we want them to be upfront about what they're doing. So when you go on to From the Farm, I've spoken to every one of them individually myself. At some point, that'll be done by a team as we onboard and momentum picks up. I won't be able to do that all myself, but what we really want is for the consumer to create that relationship. That's why our slogan is "Shake the hand that feeds you." So when you go on there, you can filter by organic or regenerative or grass fed and finished. You can filter those out, but you still should contact the producer and say, hey, we're looking for this kind of food, just want to confirm this is how you guys operate, and then they'll tell you. But we want that to be done between the consumer and the producer. We're building out the ability for people to rate the operation, so if there's any nefarious practices or issues that can self-regulate. We're also making it so the producer can rate the consumer, because I've had customers I've had to fire because they were a pain in the ass and weren't worth serving. So we're building that out so it can kind of self-regulate and they can do it that way. But we're not the people to tell a producer how they should and shouldn't operate. We want them to come to those decisions on their own and or by their peers. Because I'm not a rancher, I have no right to go explain to a rancher how certain practices might be better for them. That's not my space. And the other side of that too is because of how fragile our food supply chain is. I'm telling you, I would buy whatever food I needed if my shelves were empty to feed my family. Yes, I would be, subject to eating beef that might have antibiotics in it. I might be subject to eating grain that's been dried out with glyphosate. But if it's the choice of dealing with consequences later on my health or starving today, I'm going to feed my family today. And so we're not here to direct or vilify anybody's practices. We want them to come to those decisions on their own through their peers. But what's most important is that we have food. And then we work our way backwards from there. We live in a food system that has been established since World War II and just before. Even before World War II in 1930s, we had 6 million farmers and ranchers, 6.5 million farms and ranches in the 1930s. We're down to 1.8 million and declining today. So there's been a concerted effort to corporatize food because you get more control. And that's what government wants, is they want more control. They want more say, which is why we live in the system we live in now. Let me read a quote from the Center of Economic Development that was put out in 1962. So people can really hear what our farmers and ranchers have been dealing with, and they didn't even know it. Most of them had no idea the government was working hard to get them off of the farms. So this is a quote. The movement of people from agriculture has not been fast enough to take full advantage of the opportunities that improving farm technologies and increasing capital create. The CED proposed an adaptive approach to utilize positive government action to facilitate and promote movement of labor and capital where they will be most productive. So the goal was to move 1/3 of farmers off farms in 5 years. And that was in 1962. So to break that down, what they're saying is we have all this new technology that allows us to grow more with less people. So we need to get the farmers that are on individual plots out of the way so those can be gobbled up. That ground can be gobbled up under larger corporate controls so that we can activate and deploy all these technologies that we now have. And then the positive, the phrase, this to me is funny because I'm military, and there's a saying in the military that the punishment will continue until morale improves. So it's an oxymoron. The CED proposed an adaptive approach to utilize positive government action to facilitate and promote movement of labor and capital where they will be most productive. So basically what they're saying is we're going to put so much pressure on you that you have to leave. That's what we're doing. And that was in 1962.
Was that Earl Butz? Because I remember him saying that go big or get out?
Yeah, get big or get out.
Yeah.
That was sometime around there. I think Earl Butz came on a little bit later. But I had a conversation with a producer up here where I'm at that was it was interesting. He said that, and this was just after World War II. His grandpa was friends with somebody that the government had called on to. This person had a lot of influence amongst farmers and ranchers. And so the president at the time, just after World War II, called him in and said, we need to feed Europe. And we need you to get all of your farming friends on board with increasing production to feed Europe. This is in 46 to 50. So we want you to go and tell them they have to increase production so we can feed the world so they don't starve to death, right? And they were saying this under the context that the war has ended and Europe's going to starve to death because it's a war-ravaged country. So we need to feed them. He was really concerned about that. I think the person they went to, I think that person could foreshadow that this would not be good for us in the long run. And so he went back. And this guy I was talking to, his grandpa was in the meeting. So this guy called a meeting amongst all of his closest friends and said, this is what I've been asked to do. And I don't want to do it. I don't think we should be feeding the world. I think that's going to lead to a path of, maybe he said corporate control, maybe I don't know what language he used, but just that this wouldn't be a good idea if we have to increase beyond what's natural to feed the world. And the people in the meeting said, we agree. And if you don't, they're going to find somebody else. So maybe you can steer that. So he went back to the president and said, I'll do it, but I'll do it on one condition, that once they're back on their feet, we pull back and go back to focusing on producing for our country. And the rest is history. That didn't happen. They kept going with the way they do it. And, just like land in the West under the Department of the Interior, the land in the West is primarily controlled by the government, decisions being made from people in Washington, D.C. So for those that don't know, the Department of the Interior is people like the Bureau of Land Management, the original BLM. That confuses people if you don't spell it out. The Bureau of Land Management, Department of the Interior also has Forest Service and national parks, and they control public ground. Well, I think Utah for example, is 70% public land. So that means 70% of the land in Utah, the decisions are being made by people in DC on how it should be utilized, which is why the West is desertifying and why wildfires are out of control, because they're not logging and they're not putting enough ruminating animals on these vast public lands. And in fact, in many areas, they tell the producer, you can only have one cow-calf pair, one mama cow, one baby for 100 acres. Well, if you look into holistic land management and you understand brittle environments versus non-brittle environments are the West, the deserts. They need ruminating animals to break down the biological matter to feed the soil. Because if a tree falls in the desert, it sits there forever because there's not enough moisture to break it down, right? Or grass. When grass grows in the desert and isn't eaten, it becomes oxidized and becomes a fire hazard. That's when the grass goes from green to yellow, and oxidization is when it goes gray. Well, you need those ruminating animals, which is not just beef, it's elk and deer and bison and, all of those ruminating animals. You need them to be consuming that so they can eat it, put it back into soil matter so you have more green grass versus the dry oxidized grass. Now, of course, you're going to have a drying period in the summer, but when you manage it the right way, it's not going to be as severe. And the bison came through and they grazed in massive quantities before we wiped them out. And that refertilized the Western land. So we had beautiful grasslands. We have a desert project called the Escalante Land Trust in Utah. It's 60 acres. Yeah, 60 acres, and it's a test site. We're in this place called the Escalante Desert. But it's called the Escalante Desert because the Escalante Catholic Party is who named it. They went through there in the 1700s, and their writings say that that they had never traveled to a more beautiful, lush grass land than anywhere else in their travels than right there. And when you go there today, it is all sagebrush and greasewood and hard, compact soil. So the historical context was not what it is. So we're working on transitioning that. But the way we do that is by adding animals to the ground so that their rumen puts soil biology back into the soil. So then when it rains, a 1% increase in soil organic matter will increase water holding capacity by 20,000 gallons. So when it rains, you keep the water in the soil. It doesn't evaporate. But going back to the land grant universities that train the people that go out and then train the farmers and ranchers, they've been trained by chemical agriculture. That's who's funding these schools. And so they're not teaching holistic management practices or brittle environments versus non-brittle environments. They're teaching how to prescribe chemicals or fertilizers to get what they want. It's the same thing as the pharmaceutical, the medical space. They teach doctors how to prescribe medication, not healthy eating habits. So they've been trained by big pharma at school on how to handle certain problems, which is why our chronic health is going through the roof.
So you mentioned about the cow-calf 1 per 100 acres, because that really threw me for a loop. Do you know, do they have a reasoning why that specifically? Why so low?
Well, their job is to take into account all of the wildlife that's on the land as well, and say, okay, well, we figure we've got this many wildlife that's also eating the forage, so we've got to leave some for them, which I agree. But their math is wrong, right? Their math is backwards. We continue to see less and less forage on these lands because there's less and less ruminating animals. And so it's just, I don't know why they do it. I don't have a theory on that. I just think maybe we can just chalk it up to bad information. But so I don't know if there's really some nefarious practices going on or not, but that's what's going on. And a lot of times what'll happen is a special interest group, like Western Watershed is one of the most corrupt nonprofits that are out there, and they're funded by who knows where that money's coming from. And they'll go and sue the Bureau of Land Management to get cows off the land. And they'll use like sage grouse as the reason. The sage grouse's habitat's being destroyed, so you need to reduce the number of cattle in this area, blah, blah, blah. And they'll sue the BLM. And the BLM will typically kowtow to those lawsuits and just put the pressure on the cattlemen versus push back and tell those special interest groups that they can take a hike, and that's not true. We need to feed our country. And by the way, adding more livestock is going to increase the forage for all animals. They just don't have it right. And I couldn't begin to tell you why, just that's what's happening.
How, this is going to be a very general, broad question, but I'm going to ask it. What can the consumer do to help out with what's going on in our food system?
Buy local. The voting with the dollar slogan is legitimate. There's just no better way to put it. When you buy from the farmer and rancher, you're giving them the resources that they need to stay in operation and potentially the resources to fight back. Down in Arizona, some people may have heard that literally in the desert south of Phoenix, where there's nothing, there are massive hayfields that were owned by Saudis. And the Saudis did some backdoor deal and got access to the aquifer for pennies. And they're watering thousands of acres of alfalfa in the desert. And I was watching this interview with some of the local ranchers who were showing that their wells were dry. Like they had pumped so much water out that they dropped the aquifer, and now they couldn't operate on their properties anymore. So those people that are going out of business that I was saying, those are one of the reasons. And the interviewer asked him, why don't you guys fight, or why aren't you fighting? And they said, how? We do not have the money to go against these big corporations to fight them in court. So we're just done. And fortunately, that got enough attention. So that's the other thing, is sharing. When you hear this information, share it on social media, because social media exploded with this new information, and they lost their lease. They took it away. And so
With the Saudis?
from the Saudis. So that operation got shut down because of the pressure from the people. So buying right from your farmers and ranchers is one way. And then the other way is use your social media, use your sphere of influence to bring attention to these attacks on our producers when they happen. That's what the American people can do. If you don't, you're going to be hungry. It's just that simple.
With the topic of just like the foreign interest too with the Saudis, because I remember seeing a map of, for example, going back to the Chinese, how they're around the military bases around farmland. I don't know if you have just knowledge on this overall, just the foreign interest within the space of agriculture and land. Currently, as it stands, can you shed light on what's going on with all that?
Um, all I know is that there are a lot of farms and ranches being bought up by Chinese interests, and I don't know why. And a lot of them are in weird strategic locations near military bases. That's all true. None of that's false. And so, what their intention is, I really don't know. But China bought Smithfield, so now they're exporting a lot of our pork back to China. So they're exporting our resources that we need to their country. When we bought the slaughterhouse here in Cody, Wyoming, I don't own it, but the partners I was with when they bought it, I was here the day we closed. There was a Chinese buyer, represented by an American person that was working with them, coordinating with them, and they asked if they could park a freezer shipping container, and they wanted to buy every single thing we could produce, throw it in the container, and then when it was full, let them know, and they would come and grab it and ship it off. That was the day we closed. And we, of course, said, no, we're going to feed Americans first, and you can have the scraps. And, but that happened. I was right there for it. And I was like, holy cow, this is pretty telling. So
Yeah,
it's happening all over the country.
that is so wild to me that's just happening so much. The fact that all these foreign interests, the fact that we're exporting so much, the fact that we're not putting enough animals, especially on the Western Great Plains, because if you go back to the heyday of Great Plains, grasses were as tall as horses. There's some of the best farmland, not in just the country, but in the world. And but it's interesting whenever going back to the criteria of from the farm and mentioning just letting the market decide. I love that so much because as you're also mentioning, it's just so many farms and ranches are already closing down. It's hard enough as is for farms and ranches to stay afloat or continue to expand. And so this could be a great way to help just educate farmers and ranchers too. They're kind of doing the more conventionally side of things and seeing what the market will choose for that. I think that's a really cool aspect, and the fact that you're doing that, because at the very beginning when I first started learning about regenerative agriculture and whatnot, I definitely isolated the two sides essentially, and that's not going to work at all because you have these third, fourth, fifth generational farmers. They're just doing what their dad and grandfather and great great grandfather taught them. On top of, I mean, you've been farming 40 years, and all of a sudden you're told everything that you're doing is wrong, and you've already forked over all this money and debt, and now you have to change it all of a sudden. That's not going to work. You can't really make them the scapegoat, because that's either going to make them double down or make them just feel like shit and want to just quit. So I think this is a really great opportunity to really collaborate as a whole.
Yeah, and the thing is, I used to be a purist when I got into this, because I was first really interested in regenerative agriculture before I got into the supply chain side. And so I was kind of a purist on that, but I've since learned a lot more with a lot of friends that are in the cattle industry, and they have feedlots. I used to be anti-feedlot, but my knowledge and my education has grown that we need feedlots. We have to have them. We cannot. There are parts of the country where you're not fattening cattle unless you're feeding them in a feedlot on inputs that came from the Midwest where they can grow the crops, right? So you do have to have them. And yes, that's going to come with some things that you just should be knowledgeable on as a consumer so you can make your own decisions. But things like, in a feedlot, if it's a big feedlot, you're going to have to doctor cattle. They're going to get sick and you're going to have to doctor them. You might have to give them antibiotics. You might have to give them a vaccine. And the consumer should just know so they can make their own decision. But those are necessary in some cases. So I'm not anti feedlot. I'm anti corporate feedlot because I know the independent producer that's running a feedlot. It's like what we said in one of our campaign videos. When you buy right from the producer, they know you're buying their family name. So they're going to put a lot more energy and focus into making sure they're providing a good product because they're not hiding behind a big corporate label. If you're buying from the Joneses and you have a problem, it's the Joneses. And so the Joneses know it's the Joneses, right? But if you're buying from Cargill, what does that mean? Or when you buy from Cargill, you're not buying Cargill beef. They have a variety of labels that they're selling their product under. And so they can hide behind these labels. And if one of them gets in trouble, they drop it and they start a new label. So I'm not anti-feedlot. I'm anti-corporate feedlot. And again, I'm not anti-feedlot because that's necessary to feed a lot of people. You do have to fatten cattle as fast as possible to feed 320 million people. Now, if you have the financial ability to make different choices, because, if you can finish a cow in 18 months in a feedlot with corn and grain, your turnover is faster. You can feed more people. If you're feeding a cattle just on grass and it takes 24 months, that's many more months of taking care of that animal. It's going to cost more because it took the producer longer and to get it ready. And so it is just going to cost more, but you're going to get the benefit of the nutrient density, right? So at that point, you're investing in your food. The people that spend more money on their high quality food, they see it as a health investment, not just filling my belly at dinner. Right. And so they see that if I spend more now, I'm going to be more functioning later. If you pay the farmer now, you're not paying pharma later, is a good slogan I've heard, right? So your chronic health based on the food you eat is going to make an impact in your bottom line down the road. So you might save money now, but you're going to pay for that in quality of life later. So the other thing about feedlots as well is, my opinion is if animals are being managed in a regenerative or holistic way on all of the ground they're on before they come to the feedlot, then you're offsetting the impact of the feedlot on that small area. Even the biggest feedlots in the country, relative to the size of our country, are still a fraction of the land mass as that we have available to do cow-calf operations or rotating them on pivots or whatever. I think you're offsetting that. Now, you might have water table issues. You might have stuff like that where that leaches in and concentration that's an issue, but that's on an individual basis. But by and large, you have to have feedlots to feed America. And so I don't vilify them anymore. I just try to educate and let people make those decisions for themselves. We eat, like our freezer is stocked with regenerative beef or grass-fed and finished beef. And when I have special events, I'm going to buy a really highly marbled cut of, beef steaks for my friends, but we eat that in moderation and it tastes amazing because of the finishing that those animals were on. But our daily consumption, it's like moderation in all things, right? Our daily consumption is not that. Our daily consumption is something we know is edifying our body. And then we have special occasions where we're still getting edified. That beef is still giving us certain nutrients, but we're eating more for the flavor at that point than we are on the broad spectrum of phytonutrients, essential and non-essential amino acids, and so forth. And so there's a lot to it. And it's my biggest thing right now is I think consumers don't have the luxury anymore of just being complacent. Like you need to know what's going on with your food. And you need to know what you're going to eat if it's not there.
Man, so many great points. I mean, going back to because this is a very important topic. Just going back to you're saying with the feedlots and you're feeding more people. I mean, and Will Harris is a bold return to not giving a damn book. He really talks about whenever he switched to grass finish and how he didn't know if he was actually going to still be in business. And people are not aware of just how difficult things like that are. And this is also why I say too, there's so many levels to health and just the types of quality of the food. For example, with beef, there's the cheapest you could possibly get in a grocery store. But to me, that's still better than majority fast food, if not all fast food. And fast food to me is still better than majority of a lot of ultra processed vegan foods. But then there's just so many different layers to where obviously from a nutrient density standpoint, the grass fed and finished, that's going to be more expensive. There's always going to be trade-offs. So that's why, again, like you're saying too, awareness is so crucial for this, of what you're buying, of what you're putting into your body. And yeah, you just have to truly understand all of that, or else, like you said, you're going to pay for it in the long run with pharma.
Yeah, that's right. And the other side too is that what we do for marketing is simply just education. We're not trying to outdo another widget that's just like our widget, right? So we don't have to be sensational in our marketing. We're so far removed from where our food comes from that when we do marketing, we're just re-educating people on the food supply chain so that they can make those choices for themselves. And so part of what we do is try to teach how to source food at a better cost, and a lot of people don't know what a cow share is because they're so far removed. If you buy in bulk from the farmer and rancher, you're buying quarter, half, and whole beef typically, and it makes it much easier for them to manage the logistics, because if you bought a whole beef from me versus 10 pounds at a time, I didn't have to store it. I didn't have to send you individual packaging every time you bought. I cut out all those inputs because you bought it in bulk, so I can reduce my cost a little bit on bulk beef because it doesn't take so much for me logistically. But if the consumer doesn't know anything about buying a cow share, how do they know to ask their producer for that or even to look for that? So we try to teach what it looks like to buy a cow share, what questions to ask your farmer and rancher when you're buying a cow share. What is a cull? Asking your farmer and rancher to buy their cull cow. A cull cow would be a mama cow that's no longer producing babies. Well, that cow lived healthy on the ranch its entire life until it stopped producing babies. Buy that cull cow. There's nothing wrong with it. It's older, but guess what? There's been research done that actually it's a healthier animal because they're no longer putting energy into growing the bone structure. Everything they eat just goes into providing a higher nutrient dense food because they're not growing the bone structure anymore. That energy goes somewhere else. And so if you know about a cull, culls typically went to the auction and sold dirt cheap because there was this idea that nobody wanted a cull. Really, they just didn't know about them. And we did live in a time of false abundance for quite a long time that we got complacent on what was better for us. So re-educating the general public on all of these little industry nuances can be helpful, right? If you're on a budget, like a bull is a perfect example. Bull meat, nobody wants, at least in the ag space. It was like, I got this bull. Do you want any of it or whatever? We're going to sell it for nothing because it's bull meat. And that's typically because that bull has so much testosterone going through its body that the meat won't be, in some cases, as good as buying a steer. That a steer is a cow that's been castrated. So remove the testicles. And now it doesn't have all that testosterone going into its body. And that's why they aren't as big and muscular as the bulls are. And so there's this flavor profile difference. Listen, if I'm hungry and I'm on a budget, I'm going to fill my damn freezer with bull meat because it's all ground beef typically anyway. And what do you do with ground beef? You season it with taco seasoning or anything else that's going to be for that meal. And usually ground beef gets put into other mixtures. So who cares? You're not trying to eat a bull steak, which I've had bull steaks that weren't terrible with the right seasoning and the right cooking. But if you are educated on this, and you can say, hey, rancher John, when that bull's ready to be retired, I'd like to buy it from you. His jaw might hit the ground because you actually asked for the bull. But if you know that that's still high quality, nutrient dense meat, why not fill your freezer with bull meat so you've got food on your table? Because I promise you, if you're hungry, you're not going to care about the flavor. You're going to care that you have the sustenance to keep moving. So we just try to educate as many people as we can on all these nuances to help people from different walks of life still source right from the producer.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm almost done with my blog site to start publishing those articles because I want to help out with, say, you have a friend that like you started buying and really paying attention to your food, and you have a friend or family members that see what you're doing and start, asking you questions. I want them to go to this site that has, what it even is regenerative agriculture or the history of raw milk. And I mean, another thing I'm working on is with another, he's essentially a chef. He's not a professional chef, but he might as well be, on making a recipe book for folks that are actually buying a quarter or half cow, because that might include some cuts they've never even heard of. And so I'm trying to help, like you, trying to help make it as frictionless as possible for the end consumers, because we have become complacent. But it is, in a lot of ways, it is a big ask to shift it all together, just because we've been so used to the same thing for so long. I mean, I'm 30 now. My first 27 years, never shook the hand from a farmer or rancher. Never visited one. I might have visited one from some pumpkin patch as a kid, but outside of that, nothing. Everything I bought was from a grocery store. Every time I walked in a grocery store, my expectations were everything I need is going to be in stock, no matter the season. And so, yeah, this is why I have this podcast. This is why I have everything, because awareness is so crucial to what's going on, because it's a very fragile system. But there's ways that we could mitigate that and take care of ourselves in a lot of ways, and think long term and think the big picture of it all, not just with the food system, but with our health. Because I also like the slogan of farming is greater than symbol, farming with the PH of like pharma. Because you might not be paying for it now, but as I've personally experienced, it might happen in the blink of an eye, and it's not great. It's not great at all.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So you're out there doing the work, we're doing the work, and everybody out there talking about buying direct and what the farmers and ranchers are doing is absolutely crucial. And I think that's why we've seen the shift towards sourcing direct that we have, is because there's a lot of people, the whole Make America Healthy Again movement. They're bringing the awareness, and the way I see it is we're a partner in that movement because we're the action that can be taken. So it's like, okay, great. I'm now aware that this food is killing me. So now what? Well, fromthefarm.org is your what. And you can go there, buy direct from the producers, and start making a difference for your health. And then, like we were saying, as those producers come together and they start learning new systems and processes, that I think will spread over time. And now you'll see people doing things in a different way.
So I guess my final question could be for the producers that might not have discovered you or your site yet, or consumers that know of a producer. How would they get in contact or help try to set this up to join your organization?
Yeah, thank you for that question. When you go to fromthefarm.org, on the top, it says become a producer. And if they go there and start entering their information, that gives me the notification on the back end that they're trying to set their store up. And then from there, we reach out and schedule a meeting just so we can confirm who they are. I see one of our biggest responsibilities is to be the gatekeeper, because it won't be long before somebody tries to create a fake label and pretend that they are who they aren't, and pull one over on the consumer. Right. And so we right now do everything we can to keep that from happening. And so once they submit their information, then we get in contact, and I know the right questions to ask the producer to flush out if they are who they say they are. And so that's what can be done. Go there, click on become a producer. Don't send me their name, because I get people sending me farm contacts all the time. And the thing is that they don't know me. And so when I call them, I'm just another salesman. And so it has to be done by referral. If a referral comes in, we're at about 100% sign up when producers get on the phone with us if they've been sent our way. I'm at 100% no's if I have to cold call them and they're in the middle of something and they don't know who I am, right? So sending them to our operation so they can see what we're up to. Maybe sending them to our social media, like on Instagram, it's at From the Farm US. We've got video content on there talking about who we are and what we're committed to. One of the primary commitments for us is that we're never going to sell. And I think that's important. There are so many people out there doing what we're doing, and I'm grateful for that. I need to not be the only one, because if we're the only one, then we're back to where we are. And also we're a bigger target if we're the only one. But we made the commitment that we're never selling, because we want the American public to know that if you rally behind what we're doing, we're going to stay in control. Because I know it won't be long before some big corporation waves a big fat check in front of us just to buy us out and get us off the market. So we're never selling. That's why we're initially doing a crowdfunding right now to gain the momentum that we need. But our commitment is that myself and my co-founder, Brooke Entz, we will always have majority control to make sure the decisions that are made on behalf of the producer first, because we know that will then benefit the consumer.
I love that. And thank you so much for this conversation. If there's any last comments or anything else that you would like to mention or plug, now's a good time.
Yeah. Our WeFunder campaign is live right now. We want to feed the people by the people. Our goal is $5 million. If we don't reach it, that's okay. The momentum we've already got is incredible. We've raised $88,000 in the last 2 weeks. That's just from our own social media and so forth. We're about ready to start increasing our ad spend so that we can reach and get in front of more people on social media. But if you're looking to invest, it's a Reg CF crowdfund on a revenue share. And so the way that works is we're going to pay back 2 times your investment over time at 15% net revenue quarterly. And so that's our goal, is to feed the people by the people. That money will be used to scale our software development team, to increase our marketing, and to travel the country and get more producers on the platform throughout the nation. So if anybody listening to this would be interested in an investment in our food supply chain and food infrastructure, we would love to partner with them.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining, AJ.
Thanks, Ryan, for having us.
Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.